The poker chips stopped clicking when the girl in the diner apron shoved open the smoked glass door of the sangmok room. Frying oil, rainwater, and the metallic smell of blood came in with her, and in her fist, a dented tin swallow flashed under the chandelier like something dragged out of a gutter. "Which one of you is Kang Doyen?" she said, voice torn raw. "Your son is lying unconscious in the street." Nobody answered first. Men in dark wool coats half rose from leather chairs, annoyed before they were alarmed. At the center of the room, under a low amber lamp and a wall of black lacquer cabinets, Kang Doyun had been unfolding a napkin with the same care he brought to contracts, funerals, and threats. He stopped with the cloth caught between his fingers. It was not her words that froze him. It was the tin. Blue enamel, wing chipped at the edge, a swallow stamped across the lid. His wife had kept tangerine candies in that little tin until the year she died. He had found it years later in his son's toy drawer and never touched it again. "Where?" he asked. The girl blinked as if she had run so hard she had forgotten speech. Rain dripped from her bangs onto the polished floor. Her apron was smeared with red at one hip where she had held a child's head. "Outside Mirim Pharmacy, near the taxi rank. He wasn't waking up." Doyun stood, no shouting, no overturned chairs. The men around him moved because he did, as if his body had pulled a wire through the room. His right hand went briefly to the table edge, 2 fingers tapping once, twice. Then he was past her, coat open, the quiet in his wake more frightening than a threat. The wet street below smelled of diesel, wet cardboard, and hot chestnuts from a cart already being dragged under cover. Neon from the pharmacy sign bled across the pavement in pink and blue. A boy lay half on his side near the curb, blazer dark with rain, one shoe gone, eyelashes stuck to his skin. A tiny white sock was visible above his black school trousers. One of his hands was clenched so tightly the knuckles had blanched. Bae Narin knelt beside him again before Doyun did. She had been keeping his face turned, talking to him in a breathless whisper, though he had not answered in minutes. He was breathing. Slow, but breathing. Then he went softer. Her own hands were shaking. "I called an ambulance, and your people still weren't here." Doyun dropped to the pavement in clothes that cost more than a season of her wages and touched the boy's cheek with the back of his fingers, almost formally, as if checking whether the child belonged to the world of the living. "Yeonu." The name came out so low, Nareen barely heard it. The boy's lashes fluttered once, but did not open. Sirens rose in the distance. Doyun's face changed in a way that would have escaped anyone not already staring at him. The jaw stayed hard. The shoulders stayed square. But something old and ugly moved behind his eyes, something tied to white corridors and late arrivals and machines that could only count the loss. Nareen noticed, because she noticed everything. Men who owned rooms like the Sangmok room did not usually look afraid of fluorescent light. By the time the ambulance doors slammed shut, 3 black sedans had lined the curb. Men with earpieces created a wall. One of them reached for Nareen, perhaps to push her back, perhaps to remove her from the picture entirely. Doyun looked up from the ambulance step. "She comes," he said. That was the first order she heard him give. The second was colder. "Find out why my son was alone." The emergency wing of Seonggam Medical Center smelled of antiseptic, floor wax, and coffee gone bitter on a heater plate. Reception staff straightened before they fully understood who had entered. Nurses lowered their voices. An elevator opened without anyone pressing the call button. Nobody said Doyen's name too loudly, but the air around it behaved like it had edges. Naren sat at the end of a vinyl bench in a borrowed gray cardigan someone had pressed into her hands. Her own clothes were bagged in a plastic sack because they were wet and carried a little of the boy's blood. The swallow tin lay in her lap. She had washed her face in the restroom, but the skin around her eyes was swollen from crying and from the cold wind that had cut down the harbor streets. Across from her, Kang Doyun stood rather than sat. He had removed his coat, but not his cufflinks. He still looked as if he had come from somewhere private and expensive where people lost money politely. A doctor came out, bowed slightly without meaning to, and spoke in careful sentences. Concussion. Sedatives in the blood. Bruising to the shoulder. No internal bleeding so far. They were waiting for him to wake. Only then did Doyen breathe all the way down. Naren held out the tin. This was in his coat pocket. He did not take it at first. Open it. Inside, on the candy paper lining gone soft with years, sat three things. Half a silver blister pack with two small white tablets missing, a crumpled parking receipt streaked pink from rainwater, and a folded square of notebook paper, no bigger than a stamp. Naren unfolded the paper carefully. A child's drawing. A house in black crayon, 3 windows, a gate, a small figure in a tie, and above the second-floor window a red X pressed so hard the paper had nearly torn. He came into the diner with this tin every Thursday, she said. Sometimes Tuesdays too, if it rained and the school driver was late. He kept sugar packets in it. Tonight he didn't. Doyun's gaze moved to her for the first time with something more than urgency. You know him. He knows your son's name is Yeonu, the older nurse said under her breath to no one in particular, then busied herself with a chart. Naren looked down at the blister pack. This isn't for a child. How do you know? My mother takes the same brand to sleep when her hearing aid whistles all night and she can't rest. She met his eyes then, and if his men had expected gratitude or fear from a girl with split cuticles and cheap shoes, they had picked the wrong witness. Whoever gave this to him did not care if he made it home. The doctor cleared his throat and retreated. The hallway hummed. Somewhere, a machine beeped with indifferent discipline. Doyen finally took the swallow tin from her palm. His thumb paused over the chipped wing. How did you know where to find me? Naren almost laughed at that, but it came out broken. He told me his father never eats until other people start. He said you tap 2 fingers before you enter a room. He said everyone around you stands too fast. She swallowed. And when I saw your men outside that club, I thought only one kind of man gets that many umbrellas held over his head. One side of Doyen's mouth moved, not close enough to a smile to deserve the name. He slid the parking receipt free and flattened it against his thigh. Basement level, Miwon Legal Annex, 6:42 p.m. He did not ask why a 10-year-old had a receipt from a law office parking garage. He already understood that the question was not why. The question was who. Naren expected to be dismissed after that. People like him did not keep waitresses close once the useful information had been taken from them. Instead, he said, "Tell me everything, from the beginning. Do not tidy it." So she did. She told him about the first Thursday the boy came in alone, shoes polished, hair still damp from school swimming, sitting in booth 4 under the cracked menu board as if he had been dropped into the wrong life by mistake. He had ordered plain broth and rice, not because he liked it, but because children who are used to rules often ask for the safest thing first. She told him about the silver thermos he always carried and never drank from, about how he studied the door each time it opened, about the way he folded paper napkins into tiny boats and then crushed them flat with his thumb before leaving, about the bruise once high on his wrist, yellowing at the edges, about the questions he asked. How long does it take for a person to fall asleep if they are only pretending? Can medicine smell like oranges and still be bad? If someone says they are protecting you, do they get angry when you lock a door? Doyun listened without interrupting. Men like him were supposed to look dangerous when they were silent. He looked exact, which was worse. When she finished, he asked only one thing. Why didn't you report it? Narin's jaw tightened. There it was, the clean question from a man whose life came with options. My brother bled out next to a convenience store 6 years ago because people saw the men around him and decided they didn't want trouble touching their sleeves, she said. By the time the police stopped arguing over jurisdiction, he was cold. Her voice flattened the last word so it would not shake. I don't confuse paperwork with help. That was the first time Doyen looked at her like she was not part of the scenery around his son. Yeonu woke just before dawn. The room was blue with weak morning and monitor light. Naren had fallen asleep in a chair because each time she stood to leave, the nurse said the boy had been asking for the noodle nuna whenever he stirred. Doyun had not left at all. He sat by the bed in shirt sleeves, tie loosened, peeling a pear with a fruit knife from the family pantry basket. The strip of skin came away in one unbroken ribbon. Yonu's eyes opened to slits. He stared at the ceiling first, then at the IV, then at Naren, and only after that at his father. Your hair is ugly, the boy whispered to Doyun. Doyun put the knife down. You worried the street into stopping. I didn't have time to comb it. Naren watched the child's mouth twitch. She would remember that moment later because it told her more than any portrait on a wall could. The boy was still dizzy, still bruised, still half underwater from whatever had been put into him, and he trusted that dry answer enough to smile at it. Then his gaze dropped to the swallow tin on the bedside table, and the smile disappeared. Did he open it? I did, Naren said. Then him. Yonu shut his eyes. I was trying to get to Blue Bowl. That was the name of Naren's diner. Doyun's voice stayed calm. Who were you running from? The boy's throat moved. It took him time to choose whether telling the truth would make the room safer or smaller. Uncle Han said I needed more vitamins. Naren saw Doyun go still in a new way. Uncle Han was Han Gunte, the head of Doyun's security operation, the man whose name moved through the hospital staff in little cautious currents because he had already arrived, already checked entrances, already made 3 administrators apologize for nothing. To Yeonu, he was not a lieutenant. He was the uncle who had attended school concerts, signed field trip forms, and stood behind the father who was too dangerous, too busy, or too careful to stand there himself. Yeonu opened his eyes again and looked at Naren, not Doyun. I took the pills from Jae Nuna's drawer, the parking thing too. Uncle Han went to the legal office again. He said if I keep being difficult, father will send me away. Doyun said, look at me. The child obeyed because children always do when a room hardens around an adult. I am not sending you away. Yeonu stared for a beat, then asked the cruelest question a son can ask without raising his voice. Was I already away? The monitor kept ticking. Somewhere outside, a trolley rattled over the threshold strip. Naren saw it land. Not because Doyun flinched, he did not. Men like him had trained their faces out of those reflexes. She saw it because his hand, the one resting by the blanket, slowly closed until the knuckles whitened. He spent the next 2 days moving the way powerful men move when they are not permitted to break anything. Doors opened ahead of him. Calls were answered on first rings. Han Gonte was not available. Then was en route. Then had gone to inspect a warehouse. Then had somehow vanished into the same city he had controlled for 15 years on Doyun's behalf. Jae-hee, the live-in tutor, claimed the tablets had been prescribed for motion sickness. The prescription turned out to belong to a retired executive in Doyun's outer circle. Nareen went back to the diner once, only because the owner, Mrs. Jo Gukja, called sobbing that the lunch crowd had destroyed the kimchi order, and the broth was too thin. Blue Bowl sat opposite the harbor bus depot under a sign that hummed on damp nights. The windows were always half-fogged. Men from loading docks, women from laundry shifts, and students from the private academy on the hill all ended up there because it was open and past good judgment. Doyun arrived an hour after closing. No convoy, no men visible. Just a dark sedan with rain ticking across the hood. Naren found him standing beneath the awning, looking through the steamed glass into the empty diner where metal chopstick cups had been turned upside down to dry. He carried a paper bag from a pharmacy. "For your cut," he said, offering it. She looked at the gauze, the ointment, the waterproof bandages. "You could have sent someone." "I know." That answer, too, was exact. She let him in because Mrs. Jo had gone upstairs, and because the street was slick and hollow, and because saying no to men like Kang Doyun was one form of danger, and saying yes was another. He stepped inside and paused just beyond the door, tapping 2 fingers once against the frame before entering fully. Yeonu had not invented that. The kitchen smelled of garlic, anchovy stock, and old steam trapped in tile. Naren wrung out dishcloths, while Doyun stood near the fridge, too well dressed for the room, and somehow less out of place than he had been in the hospital. His gaze settled on booth 4. "He always sat there," he said. "You knew." Doyun looked at the table, not at her. "My driver lost him once 4 months ago. We found him here with egg on his chin, lecturing the cook about weak broth." A pause. "After that, I let him come." Naren stared. "You let a 10-year-old come here alone, across 3 intersections and a bus lane." "I had eyes on the street. Eyes aren't hands." He accepted that without defense. He was good at that, she realized suddenly. Not at apologizing, at taking a blow cleanly when he had earned it. Then she noticed the envelope on the counter near his hand. It was old, thick, softened from being opened too often. Through the gap at the top, she could see parking receipts stacked inside. Blue Bowl's alley stamp, Thursdays, Tuesdays, weeks of them. He saw her looking and closed the flap with 1 finger. "You sat outside," she said. He did not deny it. "Why not come in?" The answer took longer than the others. "The last time I sat down across from him at dinner, he stopped talking for 11 minutes. He counted the ice in his water instead." His voice stayed low, disciplined, but something in it had no polish left. "He laughs in rooms where I am not." Nareen put the wet cloth down. The fluorescent kitchen light made the tiredness under his eyes look bruised. He was not a man who had misunderstood affection. He was a man who had mistaken distance for mercy and built a system around the error. "What happened to his mother?" she asked. The question stayed between them long enough to gather the sound of rain in the drainpipe. "She died in a tunnel on the Eastern Bypass," he said. 5 years ago. Brake failure." His eyes remained on the counter. "She had just found something in my business she should not have had to find. I buried the man who profited from it and called that justice. My son was in the back seat. Since then, every room I keep safe ends up airless. Naren knew better than to ask for more all at once. He set the pharmacy bag beside her and turned to go. Then she said, "The pills weren't the only thing wrong." He looked back. The drawing in the tin. The red X was over the upstairs room, not a garage or office. Someone close enough to him to have walls in the house scared him first. The receipt came later. Do-yun was silent. "Take me there," she said. He should have refused. Any sensible man in his position would have. Instead, he took her in the sedan after midnight to a house above the seawall where the windows were tall, the staff quiet, and the air faintly scented with cedar and money. The corridor outside Yeonu's bedroom was carpeted so thickly, footsteps disappeared. Jae-hee's room stood 3 doors down. Do-yun opened it himself. A tutor's room, neat books, cream curtains, a vanity crowded with skin serums, a medicine tray in the second drawer, tidy enough to offend. Naren did not touch anything at first. She only leaned in and smelled. Citrus. Synthetic. Sweet enough to pass under a child's tongue unnoticed. "There," she said, and pointed to the blister pack missing 2 tablets from a fresh sheet identical to the half one in the swallow tin. On the desk sat an appointment card for Miwon Legal Annex. In the trash, torn once and badly, was the corner of a parking receipt. Do-yun's expression did not change, but when he picked up the blister pack, the foil buckled in his hand. The house security camera archive filled the study wall half an hour later. He moved through footage with the speed of a man who had built empires out of recorded angles and patient revenge. There was Jae-hee slipping into Yeonu's room with juice. There was Han Gontae entering the legal annex garage at 6:38 p.m. There was Yeonu leaving school early, face pale, jacket half-buttoned, clutching something under his arm. There was a black sedan following too closely at the 4th intersection. Then rain obscured the lens. Naren stood by the desk, arms folded around herself, while the images washed over the room in cold light. "Do you want the honest version?" she asked. Do-yun did not take his eyes off the screen. "There are others?" "You made it easy for him." That landed harder than accusation, perhaps because it was not dramatic enough to be dismissed. At 3 in the morning, Han Gontae returned the call. He asked after Yeonu with perfect concern. He apologized for being unreachable. He mentioned a customs problem at Dock 7. He sounded like a man stepping carefully over broken glass in the dark. "Come to the old bonded warehouse," Do-yun said. "Now." The warehouse sat by the water line where the fog came in low and tasted faintly of rust. 30 years earlier, it had stored imported fruit, then electronics, then things nobody listed properly. The overhead lamps buzzed weakly over concrete stained with old leaks. Wooden pallets leaned in shadow. A single space heater clicked by a metal desk. Han Gontae arrived alone. He was in his 50s, broad-shouldered, expensive scarf, face composed by long habit into something avuncular and unreadable. To Naren, who waited in the office above with the blinds cracked, he looked exactly like the kind of man children are told to trust because he knows everyone's names. Do-yun stood under the lamp with the swallow tin on the desk between them. Han saw it and stopped. That was enough. The rest unfolded without theatrics. No drawn guns, no smashing bottles. Power was older than that in men like them. Do-yun laid out the blister pack, the appointment card, the footage stills, the bank transfer printouts already pulled from shell accounts linked to Han's son-in-law. Han glanced at each item once. When he finally looked up, there was tiredness in him, not panic. "I kept the boy manageable," he said. "You call it cruelty because you can afford to. I call it continuity." Doyun said nothing. Han spread his hands slightly. Every time he got sick, you canceled meetings. Every time he cried, you forgot how to calculate risk. Men noticed. Rivals noticed. The moment your son became your center, you became weak in ways this city punishes. He is 10. He is your only soft spot. There is no practical difference. The heater clicked again. Somewhere in the dark beyond the loading bay, water knocked against pylons. Han's voice roughened. "I raised you after your father drank himself empty. I taught you which customs officer takes cash and which one takes school donations. I kept knives out of your back. And then that boy came along, and you began acting like the world might forgive tenderness." He looked at the tin. "Your wife taught him to hide evidence in toys. That should have told you what kind of future she was building." From the office window, Noreen could not see Doyun's face fully. She saw only the profile, the stillness, and one hand resting near the tin as if keeping it from being blown away. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost quiet enough to miss. "You mistook my trust for permission." Han closed his eyes once, not in remorse, in recognition. Doyun did not kill him there. That was the surprise. He had already sent the files elsewhere. By dawn, the legal annex, the shell accounts, and 2 crooked clinicians were in the hands of a prosecutor who owed Doyun several favors and feared him enough to use them properly. Han left the warehouse with 3 cars behind him and none ahead. In this city, that was its own sentence. When Naren came downstairs, the sea air had turned colder. Doyun was alone with the tin. "You spared him," she said. "No," he answered. "I made him public." It took Yeonu another week to come home. He returned to a house that sounded different. No tutor, no hushed footsteps outside his door, no locked medicine drawer. Doyun moved his own study downstairs to the room across from Yeonu's and left the door open for the first time in years. He began eating dinner at the table instead of in the office. The first night, father and son spent 12 entire minutes discussing a school project on bridges, and only 1 minute failing at it. Noreen did not move into their world. She was too sensible for that, and Doyun was too intelligent to ask it quickly. What happened instead was smaller and harder. He started showing up at Blue Bowl just before closing, never before the crowd thinned. Sometimes with Yeonu, who now walked in with both shoes on and his school tie stuffed badly into his pocket. Sometimes alone. He sat in booth 4 at first, the booth he had once watched from behind steamed glass, and learned how not to drain the room by entering it. Mrs. Joe pretended not to gossip and failed magnificently. The bus drivers stared. The dishwashers whispered. Noreen ignored all of them and set down bowls as if serving harbor clerks, and harbor kings required the same wrist, which, she had decided, they did. Doyun's habits became ordinary to her by degrees. The way he straightened chopsticks before speaking about unpleasant things. The way he never drank the first tea poured in a new place. The way he checked the exits without seeming to turn his head. The way he cut fruit for Yeonu into perfect crescents and always left one piece too many, as if hoping the child might still be hungry. His blind spot remained control. When Yeonu wanted to walk to the stationery store with Noreen, Doyun sent a car shadowing half a block behind. When Noreen's mother needed new hearing aid batteries, they appeared at her apartment before Noreen had admitted she could not afford them. She carried the batteries back to Blue Bowl and placed them on the counter between them. "If you help," she said, "let me see your hands doing it." He looked at the package, then at her. That sounds like a rule. It is. After that, he came himself. He carried soup containers up the narrow apartment stairs when Noreen's mother had a fever. He fixed the loose bathroom latch because it annoyed him. He brought a new kettle and accepted the old one back when Noreen told him gifts could become ropes if you weren't careful. Her mother, who heard only fragments and read lips badly but understood people very well, watched him from the floor mattress with her blanket pulled high, and once asked Noreen later, in a papery whisper, whether the stern man always looked that sad when he thought nobody noticed. Noreen answered, only when he is trying not to deserve what he wants. By late spring, the harbor wind lost its teeth. The Sangmok room closed without announcement. The smoked glass door remained, but the upstairs club became offices for a legitimate shipping audit team Doyen had long neglected, because dirtier money moved faster. Dock 7 lost 2 phantom subsidiaries. A private school principal resigned after guardianship paperwork came to light. None of it made headlines with the names that mattered attached. Men like Doyun seldom disappeared all at once. They thinned their shadows until daylight had a chance. One evening, after Yeonu had gone upstairs at Blue Bowl to help Mrs. Joe carry down new aprons, and mostly to steal the sweet rice cakes she hid from him badly, Doyun sat across from Noreen while rain tapped the window in a pattern too light to threaten. He reached into his coat pocket and set the swallow tin on the table. Noreen looked at it, then at him. "It was under my wife's mirror for 10 years, he said. Yeonu took it after the funeral. I never asked for it back. He slid it toward her. He told me last night he only gave it to people he believed would arrive. She did not touch it immediately. And now? Now he says it belongs where honest things are kept." Blue Bowl, at that hour, smelled of stock, wet pavement, and the soap she used on the tables. Outside, a bus wheezed at the curb. Inside, a refrigerator motor clicked on and hummed steadily. Noreen opened the tin. Inside were 3 sugar cubes wrapped in wax paper, 2 hearing aid batteries, and a key on a plain steel ring. Not a mansion key, not a car key, a single apartment key. Doyen watched her face, not the tin. "The building above this diner is empty. I bought it 3 weeks ago. Before you get angry, listen." His voice stayed level, but there was no armor in it now, only care and the fear that follows care too closely. "The second floor can become a proper kitchen for Mrs. Joe. The back room can be soundproofed for your mother. The third-floor apartment has decent light. If you want none of it, I'll make the deed over to the restaurant and never speak of it again." Naren turned the key between her fingers. "And what do you want?" He could have lied with elegance. Men in his position usually did. Instead, he said, "A room where my son laughs, and you do not have to run in bleeding to find me." She looked down, because there are moments when looking directly at a person would crack something open too fast. Upstairs, Yeonu laughed at something Mrs. Joe had said. The sound came through the ceiling, muffled but certain. It was Noreen who reached across the table first, not for his hand, but for the cuff of his shirt. She smoothed it once, an absent little gesture, and left her fingers there. "You still make rooms too carefully," she said. "I know. But they breathe better now." He exhaled, and in that small surrender there was more intimacy than in any speech either of them could have managed honestly. Summer came in on damp air and fairy horns. On the first evening, Naren moved her mother into the apartment above Blue Bowl. The harbor threw back a wash of bronze light off the water, and every window across the street looked briefly expensive. Mrs. Joe cried over cabinet space. Yeonu carried chopstick holders as if he had been appointed to a sacred office. Doyun, sleeves rolled, stood in the bare kitchen, installing a shelf that was already level before he checked it a third time. When Naren came in with a box of bowls, she found father and son sitting on the floor amid newspaper sheets, folding the old parking receipts Doyun had once saved into paper swallows. Yeonu's folds were crooked. Doyun's were exact. The boy deliberately wrinkled one wing on his father's bird just to see if he would object. He did not. He only smiled and bent the other wing to match. Rain started after midnight, soft at first, then harder, striking the new awning over Blue Bowl with the same rush Noreen remembered from the night she had run across the street with blood on her apron and terror burning through her lungs. She went to the window on instinct. The pavement below gleamed black under the pharmacy sign. Water ran bright along the gutter. No child lay there. No bodyguards were late. No one was shouting for help into a room full of men who had forgotten the ordinary cost of delay. Behind her, she heard the low murmur of Doyun's voice, then Yeonu's sleepy protest, then the rustle of a blanket being pulled higher. She turned. Doyun had fallen asleep sitting against the kitchen cabinets, head tilted back, one arm around his son, who had gone boneless with trust against his side. On the table above them, beneath the warm cone of the hanging light, the dented swallow tin sat open among sugar cubes and spare batteries, its chipped blue wing catching the rain-reflected glow from the window, as if, after all that running, it had finally reached the room it was meant to keep.